Hello, good morning. Thanks, Clementine. I'll be speaking in English, and maybe you can raise your hands, Maggie, if I go too fast. So as been said, my name is Yolande Zola Zoli. I serve as curator at the Van Abbemuseum in Eindhoven in the Netherlands, so the bit of the south of the country. And thank you to the team, thank you to Cedric and Romaric and Sandra for organizing and convening us. I felt to say before I start, maybe make clear. Too far? Is this better? Way better? Okay. I thought to say before I start that whilst I'll be talking through an exhibition that worked with the collection that was in the spring earlier this year at the museum, I am not a collections curator. So this division that you spoke to earlier lives very true to this day at the Van Abbe. So in a sense, actually, it's a bit of an experiment, and I think my colleagues allowed me to trespass in the collection. And the exhibition came about as a result of the pandemic, actually. So I started at Van Abbe in 2022, and I think like many of us, we were forced to kind of think about how to work with what's at hand, so what's in the depot, as opposed to maybe inviting in artists from afar. And that allowed me an opportunity to work with the collection, having started at the Van Abbe in 2020. So I've been at the museum the pandemic years. And I'm really glad that I did, because collection is where you understand your site, right? You understand what is valued, what is disvalued, what is left out, the conditions in which things are included. So maybe to preempt that way, I'm a bit tasked with waking you up, but I'm going to read. So let's see how we do, yeah? Disobedience in the museum, mud, mother, and death work in a lasting truth is change. No transformation without death. No transformation without death. No transformation without death. Place-based practice. Get grounded. Get grounded. Nothing is everything. Prayer as change. Worldwide. My 22 summer break aligned with the tail end of A Lasting Truth as Change, Altic, the first major exhibition I curated at the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven. On my return to the office, I found a massive, colorful ball of vinyl sitting on my desk, left there by my colleague Diederik Koppelmans, who's the head of technical staff. For Altic, we had selected stock colors in vinyl to cover the plinths in the galleries, and a 0.5 millimeter line ran across all 10 of the galleries to highlight the 1.5 meter ideal hang height for works according to Western modernism. Altic's design grammar, in a way, was bound up in that ball that doubled as an inside joke and a reminder to the great expense of restoring the galleries that held over 80 works from the collection and 10 loans or so, or commissions so not from the Van Abbe collection. So upon starting as exhibitions curator at the Van Abbe, having joined the Heritage Institution in 2020 after 10 years at a smaller government-funded space, Cascar Institute, working for the Commons, which is in Utrecht, I learned that it costs about 5,000 euros to paint a gallery of 100 square meters, which is roughly the size of the galleries at Van Abbe. So it was then cheaper to apply and remove the vinyl to plinths than paint and re-whiten them after. For me, this figure became a signifier for the well-oiled mechanisms of heritage institutions, as compared to my earlier experiences working with installers to closely adhere to artistic vision, with little need for concern over what height might be required to provide a blank slate for the next artist. Here, that blank slate, due to expense and other concerns, was much more apparently a normative one. As a worker in the museum, my exhibition budget foresees even superficial changes to the building's architecture and reverts to a default white galleried and supposed neutral state. One could blow an entire exhibition budget on color, right? So 5,000 euros is now one of the first things that cross my mind when I visit exhibitions in large Western museums. It's a figure from which I can make superficial guesses to the degree to which a municipal institution values the exhibition on display. So I also came to work at the Van Abbe in the wake of the global movement advocating for Black life, compounded by a global pandemic, climate breakdown, and a surge of individuals coming forward with stories of sexual assault in the Dutch arts and culture sector. If a museum responded with an exhibition, painted walls became a quick way for me to size up just how sincere they were. For exhibitions, after all, is where institutions absolve themselves from structural accountability through their representational nature, right? If museums, rather, as collection holders, are extensions of the state, they also signify what the state values, who over whom, and the collection is a way to gauge those values, those state values. So disobedience in the museum, therefore, kind of rubs up against state power at its best, I would say. It's not an exact science, of course, but maybe a playful curatorial one. But from the amount of white walls that I witness in an exhibition, I can deduce the financial resources attributed to it. So this 5,000 euros clarifies an understanding of exhibitions that bear cultural firstness by virtue signaling and spotlighting artists of color, while failing to compute that representation is not a stand-in for the transformation that needs to happen systemically. So when Altec, or A Lasting Truth as Change, was conceived, many were asking for their workspaces to live up to the norms and values that they publicly project. In working with a collection of around 3,300 works, I decided to invite a handful of artists outside to be co-conspirators, so outside of the collection. And maybe in the spirit of disobedience, how abolition figures in a heritage institution and its aesthetics became the departure point for my and my co-editor, Taylor Le Melle's development of the exhibition's publication that is concerned with transformative justice, following the likes of Angela Davis, especially in conversation with Gina Dent, Rachel Nelson, as part of their discussion series, Visualizing Abolition. As Le Melle sums in our introduction to the book, Davis has observed how her image has become a signal for a set of politics, values, or even legislation, and notes that while all images have liberatory potential, the use of hers has little to do with her and cannot be a stand-in for the movements, as images by themselves are not self-evident, right? But if image makers, artists, or those with creative potential can help us work to understand what we don't yet know how to imagine, there's maybe possibility. It is in the spirit that the museum is at its best, I would say, reformist, within the wider quest to resist the oppression of extraction in a kind of racial capitalist context that we operate in. So, much like a fellow in a prison industrial complex, abolitionist and organizer Miriam Kaba, citing David, puts it, PIC, or prison industrial complex, is a product of various reforms over time. The prison itself was a reform. We cannot reform the police. we cannot reform prisons, I would argue the same logic extends to museums as part of the exploitative, misogynist, heteropatriarchal system of racial capitalism. Kaba recognizes a dual approach to restorative or transformative justice, wherein abolition is the horizon, so that non-reformist reforms can be appropriated. That is, those who do not make it more difficult to dismantle the system one is trying to abolish. So one would use a combination of it, like reformist reforms toward abolition, right? And all this with the mind that abolition is the ultimate horizon. So I'm kind of saying all of this because it's the kind of bedrock or context from which the exhibition was born. The exhibition that sprung from this focus then became a reformist query around change, particularly the question of how does change figure or enter in a heritage institution. Heritage institutions being those that seek to preserve and display content of historical value. How can institutions get into the right kind of relationship with change and transformation? How can they resist conflicts, crises, and issues of harm without relying on the systems of domination, punishment, and control that created them, if you think about the history of the museum, right? How might they instead use art's possibility to grasp things at their root, to seed and cultivate freedom-based systems that thrive outside of the oppressive structures of late capitalism and patriarchy and colonialism that's bound up within it, in order, I think, to be in harmony with the planet. So our recasting of the collection away from autonomy and genius towards conviviality was in dialogue with sci-fi writer Octavia Butler's unfinished Parable series, which she writes between 93 and 98, I believe. Particularly her tenet or the saying, which the title of the book and the exhibition also borrowed from. The tenet goes, all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. So in the book, which is highly recommended, read, the protagonists in Butler's Parable show strength through adapting to the inevitable continuum of change. So when you take that literary example and you maybe apply it to the museum context, you could argue that for us, artists are those protagonists, right? And we hope that the museum can be their guidance. So we look to do this in presenting 80 artworks from the Van Abbe collection made in the last century that have acted against the status quo, that speak in some sense to change's continuum. And we highlighted different artists, movements, and exhibition histories with their associated knowledge systems, economies, communities, or grammars for living differently or justly. There was a full gallery installation by Stanley Brown, works not yet acquired by the museum, despite having previous presentations, including works by Theaster Gates and the Black Monks, Christian Yampeta. Recent museum acquisitions I was quite interested in, including Ana Mendieta, which we acquired for the show, Glenda Martinez, Munira Al-Sol, Baudry Lawrence, Mercedes Azpilicueta, and first-time showings at the museum by artists Ima Basiakon, Simnikewe Buhlungu, Ansuya Blom, G, and Dongwan Kam, and historical works on loan, particularly the work of Marlo Moss, whose work is we loaned from the Krille Müller Museum. So for all of the exhibition's intentions and failings, maybe I'll try reflect on critical instances, and for economy, take 3 out of the 10 galleries, 10 examples of change, and I'll focus on place-based practice, nothing is everything, no transformation without death as case studies, of when maybe the museum's underlying system revealed its fortitude along the road from concept to acquisition. Okay. Mud. Richard Serra's T-junction meets place-based practice. Sometimes I'm taken for granite, and I wish that those who take me for granite would once in a while treat me like mud. It's an excerpt from Ursula Le Guin's poem. One of the heaviest works in the collection, the Fanoba collection that is the T-junction from '88 by Richard Serra. The work consists of a horizontal and vertical beam that weigh about 5,200 kilograms, such that the museum floors need to be supported with extra stilts and scaffolding from underneath. I had in mind to install the site-specific work, so Serra designed this work for Van Abbemuseum and for the 10th gallery in the old building, and it cannot be shown in any other context in the museum. So I had in mind to show that site-specific work that can only be installed in the 10th gallery. And as part of the gallery or the room titled Place-Based Practice, which was concerned with living solutions locally. The work has not been installed in the museum in almost 20 years. So Van Abbe is from 1936, for context. So the T-junction hasn't been installed in almost 20 years due to the cost and the engineering, and it could actually, in current day, kill someone. So Diederik, my colleague who I mentioned at the start, calculated that the paint, you were also talking about paint, had in the room had accumulated such that the room gets nerdy, 2 by 9 millimeters less wide and 2 by 9 millimeters less long, which they didn't anticipate. I find that interesting. So when they were designing this work, and it's a site-specific one, the environment, the architecture that it could change or evolve, that wasn't factored in. So there's more elaborate story that I'm very happy to share at a later stage, but in the end we couldn't share Serra's piece due to cost mainly, and the dimensions of the wall and more exciting things. But what was interesting is that it gave insight into who gets to take up space, the exact size of that space, right? And the size and the weight of the space that one is entitled to occupy, so the likes like Serra. So in the end, in the exhibition, iron inadvertently made room for mud, and the earth prompted me to focus on other works in the collection that emphasize the ground beneath one's feet, quite literally. This included land artists, so you imagine Richard Long's zigzagging 60 stones based on walks that he took in Bolivia in 72, I believe, or Lubaina Hamid's work, particularly, she has a work called Meat Mountains from 84, with the inscription, wooden works, and at the feet or the legs of the work, there's this inscription, women turn your full energies on the restoration of the planet. Or Otobong Kanga's The Leftovers is a tapestry landscape depicting a landscape in Namibia that's damaged as a result of mining minerals. Or Ana Mendieta's Mother of Waters, a photo print that suggests the artist's body carved into rock. So Mendieta's work, as you will know, involved burning and scribing carving of a body shaped into the earth as a tactic for return due to longing for her mother country or birth country. She moved to the US when she was a teen with her sister. So in this gallery, 11 works were placed on the floor. Here's my disagreement about height. Taking cue from Long and Mendieta in a way, who encourage a kind of, I would say, reparative relationship with the ground or the earth. And maybe encourage us to enact change from where one stands, right? So change is place-based. And maybe second part to this is they propose, or change being place-based is particularly at stake when we consider climate catastrophe. So to reflect on place is to reflect on history, people whose land we occupy, and sustainable systems. Placing the works together, recast them away from the logic that centers individual autonomy, which I would argue is what's happening in the T-junction, towards personal practices of getting in the right kind of relationship with the earth. This is not so much, so, I mean, one of the things that I was interested in is if it's possible to recast our understanding of canon works. And it's not so much to disturb our enchantment with canonized works, right? I wasn't interested in doing that, but to rattle the autonomy of that project by bringing them into conversation with others. So conversation, I agree, close to, sometimes works almost kiss and speak to one another, such that works or canon works can be decentered, and we shine light on place-based practices over autonomous ones in this case. So recasting, as I understand it, is not creating hierarchies with works according to same standards, but shifting the conditions of our engagement in knowing that history is in fact negotiated. So where history is concerned, for example, scholar Karen Salt makes a case for the role of the reviser, whereby we shift the terrain by moving away from the becoming to the disorganized unfinishedness that we determine. And this is not a permanent fix, I think, but one of our first goals of revisioning is to reuse the tools around us to move the conditions. So insertion and inclusion into collections, yes, but on our own conditions. Or on our own terms. So the terms for engaging with the museum collection involved reshaping given relations and expectations around how to tell an art historical story by refusing linear storylines, embracing unchronological timeline and themes that were afforded to us by the sci-fi book Parable of the Sower and Talents. And this is not an attempt to solve, but to extend thinking on the constitution and presentation of collections through a small, maybe, disavowal of conclusive, predetermined stories. Beginner's curiosity. Beginner's curiosity. Beginner's curiosity. Connectedness over autonomy. Connectedness over autonomy. Prayer as change. Prayer as change. No transformation without death. Resistance through self-determination. No transformation without death. Mother care, nothing is everything. So over the years, artist Ima Basikon has developed a conservation of life practice that includes dehydrating foods, fermentation, and Sunday-long runs as a format to imagine hikes where endurance is pushed and sustenance is required. Part of this practice is developed from kitchens She's worked to extend the shelf life of healing properties of plants, including claims of antioxidant, antimicrobial, antifungal, diabetic properties that are, and benefits that are found, or probiotic benefits found from fermentation. So if we accept that the racial capitalist context that we live in is quite literally making us sick, then Ocon's attention to the gut's role in our general well-being contributes to defense against disease. And Ima Abasi was one of the artists that I invited to be a kind of co-conspirator, and she made a work that's made out of kombucha mothers called Lactic Trust Account, Triple Enchantment of Being, Not to Be, Not Perishables, which consists of 2 scobies, or kombucha starters or mothers, which are like these cellulose mats that house the bacteria and yeast cultures that turn sweet tea into kombucha, for you that are familiar with the fermentation process. So museums famously negate natural life and preserve natural life from the museum, right, to preserve the integrity of the artworks. And as a living thing, the mothers required particular kind of care when they were installed in the museum, which Ima Abasi Okon negotiated as part of the process. And it's captured in the work's caption, as well as the contract. So the caption, the caption was an extended one and almost operated like an addendum to our contract, and had 4 points. So the tea had to be renewed every 14 days or so, on specified dates. And then the first time she taught fellow artist Simnike Obuhlungu how to replenish the mothers. So it's kind of transfer of knowledge happening there. The second one is because the works were in conversation in the galleries, we registered and recognized that the other works in the gallery were part of Ima Abasi's work. So work by Isa Genska, Jos Monders, Eve Klein. A mother care salary of 60 euros per hour, excluding 21% VAT and excluding travel costs. And the fourth point of negotiation, 17% freelance pension contribution. She makes a point that artists need to be saving for pension as well. So during the 4 months, the mothers rested and were stored in this tea brew, the fermentation process always being in dialogue with the environment. So in dialogue with Klein, in dialogue with Genska, and in dialogue with Jos Monders. And required specific conditions that were tended to by Simnike Obuhlungu, who inherited the caretaking of the kombucha mothers from Ima, right? And why I'm telling you all of this, because I think for me, Ocon's work performed at the presentational front and the administrative back, or the back of house in the institution. In respect to the former, it was a place where people were invited to rest on the carpet. Visitors could lie down and engage with artworks in a meditative space, kind of prompted also by the Isa Genska wooden beam that was laid on the ground. And then in respect to the latter, the artist's contract in the caption stipulated the institution's support feeding the mothers, and that this work also had to consider a pension, right? So like her other works, the intent and the resource were brought closer together in a kind of attempt to actualize change in an institution. I see I'm a bit tight on time. Almost over? One more or I stop? Oh, okay. One more example? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. 5 minutes. Okay, let's see. Um, Death work, no transformation without death gallery. Oh, this is good. We're almost there. Yeah, we can finish. So, multi-hyphenate artist G's sculpture installations and video works. And she works with video performance drawings, and more recently has developed a death doula service, which figures as part of her daily practice. And G is fundamentally collaborative, and she often performs with her mother and comes from a family of entertainers. And ideas for her come often when she's walking around in the city interacting. So she's often actually found in Amsterdam with her compact roaming backpack gallery called Grooming Gallery that accompanies her when she leaves the country too. And for Altic, we publish G's Grief, Sad, Feeling Weird, Out of This World coloring book, which was published in the context of Altic, and based on her daily drawing practice that normalizes the abstractedness of what happens when our loved ones pass on. An exercise at the root of her sculptural installation that was also shown, the installation called Unseen, Just, Felt Souls, Hardly Living, Skin, Homes, and Heads. The work consists of 5 seismic ceramic sculptures, you'll remember, or souls, in a kind of meandering or near figurative style that mimics her drawing style. And then they placed often on quotidian objects, like instead of plinth, so a washing machine will be on a carpet, a found table. So the ceramic souls embody people close to G who've passed on, and while others in that of the 5 souls represent people who maybe linger in between. So she's working with like visualizations of grief, and these sculptures were sculpted intuitively in a clay coil technique to realize a bigger than life-size form that's required to hold them. So the artist had to hold it up repeatedly in a meditative state, and she describes it as more body, less head. And they were made at the onset of the pandemic at her residency at the Rijksmuseum, or the Rijksacademy rather. And all around maybe the idea, what if the things that you cannot see and only feel would be in 3D? And I think the answer to that is that we might feel the immensity, the mass and the weight of that grief. And why I'm telling you about this is because we're in process of acquiring G's work. And conservation work includes kind of arrogant, I think, attempts at resisting death cycles. And one quickly learns that when you try and consider death-centered practice in a collection. So what happens when death practices enter a collection? I've had to think of this in the process of acquiring G's installation, which involves conversations, and that it involves that we train to become shared custodians of these souls or these vessels. How, for example, if at all, do we repair the natural cracks in the ceramic that are a result of the firing process? And G's massive work, which took 5 bodies to install and to move in place, they're quite precarious, and there's a lot of nervous energy in the museum at the moment around them. When we were installing, we kind of all fell silent and paced in anxiety and maybe prayed. Yet in this default to conserve what does not figure into consideration is the lesson behind deterioration as care. What if the vessels cracked open in our collection? What if we leaned into the material with properties that wear, tear over time? And we accepted their aliveness. Would this interfere with their afterlife? These are questions that I'm mulling over. as we working to resolve these cracks. And when we were installing, there was a kind of common phrase in the team: if we fail to hold the work, we should move aside and let the ceramic pieces fall. Kind of verbal agreement with the install team, which feels kind of controversial in the context of museum. But as we mull over how to resist damage, I'm learning that the cracks in the works provide a wider lesson to surrender to the impermanence, to resist the consumption and capture of the heritage institution, since, after all, the horizon of death work is not the institution. So death work surpasses it. Yeah? Okay, we're done. We're there. Thank you.